Good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to have you here. I am Monique Villain, and I run the Thomson Reuters Foundation. And I'm particularly pleased to be here tonight to present some of the highlights of the Trust Law report on protecting whistleblowers in the UK, a new blueprint. Whistleblowers, including many in the room today, are unsung heroes heralding freedom of expression and the rule of law, who should be protected by the justice system and recognized by our society. But the sad reality is that none of that happens, and that the whistleblowers are often left alone with sometimes huge fees to pay to their lawyers and no employment. Strengthening the rule of law is absolutely core to what the Thomson Reuters Foundation does, and we work on that with all our 4 programs. Through our journalism, we shed light on some of the most underreported issues in the world. And we cover humanitarian issues, women's rights and human rights, slavery and trafficking, human impact of climate change, and now access to law and access to property, which is a huge issue around the world and totally underreported. We challenge perception, we spark debate, and hold responsible parties accountable. Through our media development, we promote freedom of expression in developing countries by setting up independent media agencies. We did that first with Aswat Masriya immediately after the revolution and before the election, and we run for 3 years Aswat Masriya in Egypt in Arabic to give independent news to media in Egypt in order that they have more unbiased coverage. We have done that again with Myanmar Now, that we launched 6 months before the elections in Myanmar, and we still cover the issues for the Myanmar press. And we do the source in Zimbabwe on business news. We train journalists around the world since 30 years, and we have trained more than 15,000 of them in all kinds of languages and on all kinds of issues. So that's the second program that has to do with the rule of law. But the one certainly that has the most to play with is Trust Law, which is this program that I created in 2010 to spread the practice of pro bono in the world and help NGOs and social enterprise with all their legal issues. All their legal issues, but litigation. Because I had no idea how you can organize litigation on a global scale. So it has been a huge success. In 5 years, we have more than, almost 6 years now, it will be 6 years in July. We have more than 560 law firms, member of Trust Law, who work totally for free for almost 3,000 NGOs and social enterprise, 50-50, in 177 countries. So it has been a huge success. Why has it been a huge success? Because people need lawyers, and lawyers are costly. So it grows by the week, and this is certainly now the flagship program of the foundation. In that case, let me come back first to one program we did last year, which is very close to that too. We did a very big research for Reporters Without Borders with the international law firm Paul Hastings to publish a defense handbook for journalists and bloggers, and more or less to show that whatever the country where they operate, when a government wants to have access to their sources or whatever, there is always an international law to cover them. So this has been published. This has been a huge work. I mean, there were 70 partners of Paul Hastings to work on that around the world, and it has cost them $1.5 million in time of brain time of their lawyers. So they did it pro bono. So today, it's a discussion that I think comes at a crucial time. I know it's a long time we have started to discuss this program, but it comes just fine. And the release of the Panama Papers, which was probably the largest whistleblowing disclosure in history, just show how important the people who whistleblow are. This will certainly force governments and societies globally to reevaluate the conflict between privacy and accountability. Whistleblowers are champions of transparency, and through their actions, they ensure that corruption doesn't go unnoticed or unpunished. The Trust Law report we are launching today reviews the UK's Whistleblowers Law, the Public Interest Disclosure Act, and identifies potential flaws, proposing improvement that can boost protections for the whistleblowers. The report highlights how the Act fails to shield employees from being fired or harassed if they report wrongdoing in the workplace. In fact, according to the Act, workers can only file for compensation after they have suffered retaliation. By that stage, often their jobs and career have been finished, and not to mention the emotional damage and sometimes the legal fees they have. Even then, their only choice is to go to the employment tribunals where costs are very high, waiting times are long, and compensation awarded insignificant. Unfair dismissal cases typically take 20 months to reach a decision. So what legal reforms are needed to punish those who retaliate against whistleblowers? What policies should companies introduce? These are some of the questions addressed by the 20 reforms proposed by the report. We would like to thank Blueprint for speech for the work done on the report, and print copies of the report are here so you can help yourself and have it. And it is my pleasure now to hand over to Stephen Sucker of the BBC to open the first Blueprint for Free Speech Prize Awards ceremony.
Thank you, Monique. Thank you, everybody. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. Thanks to Monique, to Thomson Reuters, to Trust Law, and of course to Blueprint as well. And it's a great honor and a privilege for me to be able to present these awards. It means a lot to me. Some of you may know me, some of you may not, but I present a show on the BBC called, well, there you go, Hard Talk. And, you know, talking sometimes is hard, and we talk to people who oftentimes have really important stories to tell, but some of them are circumscribed by the positions they hold, who in the end are restricted in what they can say. And it is truly brave people who sometimes take a decision to overcome those restrictions and tell truth to power, even though they know it's going to have extraordinarily difficult ramifications and repercussions for themselves. I have to say, at least one of the prizes, and we have 3 prizes to give out tonight, one of the prize winners tonight I am very familiar with because I've interviewed him on Hard Talk, and his story is extraordinary. Another winner tonight came up to me just before this event began and said, oh my God, if I'd known it was you doing the interview, I think I'd have backed out. But anyway, don't worry, it's not going to be Hard Talk tonight. It's my job just to sort of, you know, elegantly, I hope, guide us all through the prize giving, and we're going to hear some very insightful comments from our judges as well. Just before we begin the whole thing, I was having a quick bottle of beer outside and reading The Guardian, and it just struck me, this is fascinating. This is a letter from today's Guardian. It's from just a citizen, a concerned citizen, Mike Jones from Exeter, who happens, it seems, to be very concerned about the transatlantic trade deal that is currently being negotiated in Europe. And he says this in his letter to The Guardian: it's great news that TTIP is facing such real rigorous challenge across Europe now. Such accountability is important. He says, but the victory for the people, for people power, that this discussion over TTIP represents would not have been possible without the leaking of secret documents. So it is ironic, he continues, that the European Parliament has just voted in favour of criminalising whistleblowers who leak information about corporations and criminalising journalists who publish such information. How long a stretch, he ends, do you reckon you might get for leaking another Panama Papers? So that's just how relevant this all is tonight. You know, this is a real important issue for all of us, and that's why I think these prizes are so important. So that's enough from me for now. I'm going to introduce you to our first speaker. It's Dr. Soulette Dreyfus, who's the Executive Director of Blueprint for Free Speech. Soulette, in many ways, has made tonight's event and these prizes happen. She founded Blueprint with a view to improving the standards of law around the globe that protect freedom of speech in a more general sense, but she's zoomed in on this issue of whistleblowers and protections to be afforded to them. She's worked in academia, she's worked in journalism and activism. She's a research fellow in the Department of Computing and Information Systems at the University of Melbourne, as well as being the sort of guiding force behind Blueprint. So please give Soulette a very warm welcome.
Thank you all for coming tonight. In this age of transparency, whistleblowing is emerging as the nexus between fighting corruption and wrongdoing and freedom of expression. I think of whistleblowers as being the ethical temperature takers in our society. They are the person who tells you when the patient is ill, when the ethical temperature is not what it should be, and they rally round to fix it. One of the measures of how far society has advanced in the progress of civilization, in my mind, is how we treat these people who speak up about wrongdoing. And we have a ways to travel yet on that. That's why getting the right laws and implementations of those laws to protect whistleblowers is so important, and that's what Blueprint's work is. We're an international not-for-profit that champions freedom of expression, including protection for whistleblowers, and we're dedicated to creating legislative change around the globe in order to protect free speech, and we provide practical roadmaps to do so. We started in Australia, but we've now grown internationally with staff in Germany and Sweden and soon to be in southeastern Europe. Part of our role is very much to partner with other NGOs to support their work in this area as well. And we've had a very fruitful legal research relationship partnership with the Thomson Reuters Foundation and Trust Law, and we're looking to expand our working partnerships with the UK NGO community in the near future. So tonight we launched this report, Protecting Whistleblowers in the UK, a New Blueprint, which has come about with such good help from the Thomson Reuters Foundation's wonderful trust law program. It takes the critical eye of the UK Public Interest Disclosure Act, the UK PETA, why it's failing and succeeding in places. And this is important for the UK, but it's also important globally. The UK PETA law has a beacon in this area. Indeed, the very starting point for many countries who are just coming to this newly evolving area of law. More than 20 countries around the globe are looking at bringing in or upgrading whistleblower legislation. I have personally sat across the table from both advocates and also representatives of ministries of justice and anti-corruption agencies. And they have said things to me like, well, we'll have to study the UK law on it. So it's very pivotal, the UK PETA Act. That's why it's so important not only to get it right for the UK, but it's very important for all these other countries that look to the UK to understand where PETA fails so that they don't make any of those same mistakes, and where it succeeds so they can replicate those. Our report evaluates the UK PETA against 26 international standards. It finds that the PETA receives a score of only 37%. There's a ways to travel yet. The report also finds that, based on analysis of our data sets and qualitative interviews with whistleblowers and legal practitioners, that the estimated typical legal costs for a plaintiff in a UK PETA case who take their case to a final employment tribunal hearing are between £8,000 and £25,000, yet the median compensation for a whistleblower is only about £17,000. Now, if it takes on average 20 months to actually get to that end point of the finding in the employment tribunal, you can imagine it's an awful lot of time potentially without an income and paying fees. for very little compensation in the end, all for trying to do something to actually help the broader society, whether that's in food safety issues or health issues or corruption issues. We have been fearless at Blueprint about reporting in this report. It's not mealy-mouthed, it says it like it is. Change may happen in increments, but blueprints must aim for the very best outcome and show which way is possible. The Blueprint Prizes will be awarded shortly to the recipients who have already previously been notified of their award. However, the judging panel also wanted to give special recognition to 4 other whistleblowers who displayed bravery and integrity in revealing a truth for the greater public good. If we can get that slide to jump to the first one now. I won't give a lot of detail about their cases. The first one is Danikas, who is connected to both Greece and South Africa. You'll be able to read about their particular stories on blueprintprize.org, which is the prize website, which will be available as of the end of the ceremony. The second recognition goes to Vesna Marilovic, and she is from Bosnia and Herzegovina. The third one is Howard Shaw from the UK, homegrown. And the fourth one is Witness K, who we can't actually reveal because we don't know his actual name, whose case relates to Australia and Timor-Leste. I want to make a special welcome to one of my academic colleagues who's here tonight, Dr. Wim van der Kokhoff of Greenwich University, who has partnered with me and other academic colleagues in researching, studying public attitudes to whistleblowing in the UK and other countries. It's important because this international team of researchers, who also includes Professor David Lewis, has really drawn attention to the fact through our research, our academic research, that there's very broad public support for whistleblowing across a set of countries. I won't go into all the detail of the statistics here, but it suffices to say that support is quite consistent in its numbers across Australia, across the UK, and indeed in countries like Iceland. I'd also like to make a special thank you tonight, not only to the Thomson Reuters Foundation, but also their trust law partners, to Professor David Lewis, who's here, Barrister Jack Mitchell, both of whom gave fantastic critiques on several rounds of the report and very valuable insight into the UK PETA law, lawyer Andrew Boosfield, Charles Smith, and For Communications, among others. And there were many others who also worked, but I won't go through the long list now because there are more interesting whistleblowers to listen to than me. Thank you also to those who came down from Scotland, where there is an interesting growing grassroots movement to protect those in the Scottish NHS who are speaking up, including activists who are at the most grassroots level literally handing out 30,000 flyers and plan to visit every single hospital in Scotland to understand the issues around whistleblowing in the NHS up there. When the ship that is our society lifts heavily to one side, whistleblowers are an important corrective mechanism to pull it right again. And I invite you to meet some of the people who have worked to right this ship now. Thank you all for coming tonight, and I'll give the podium back to Stephen.
Yeah, thank you, Sulette. Well, let's get on with it then. The important part of the business this evening is handing out the awards, and it's a great pleasure for me because these awards really are about courage, about bravery and courage and doing the right thing and doing it in a selfless sort of way to benefit wider society. So all of these people we're about to meet have fantastic stories to tell. It's also my pleasure to introduce our prize givers. We've got some very special prize givers. Our first prize giver I'd like you to give a warm welcome to in just a moment is Sue Woodford-Hollick. Now, Sue is in my trade, or certainly was in my trade for a very long time, as a highly respected, successful investigative television journalist. She won lots of prizes for her journalism. She's now a businesswoman. That's a transition I've never managed to achieve, but well done to you for doing that. She's done all sorts of different things, and many of them connected with her belief in the importance of fighting for freedom of expression. She's chaired the Free Expression Organization Index on Censorship. She's been heavily involved in the arts, with the Arts Council, the Tate Museums. She is a trustee of Reprieve and of the Complicit Theatre Company. She's got a list of activities and commitments as long as your arm. But tonight, she's here to tell us about our first prize winner. So, Sue, over to you.
Sure. Thank you very much for that, Stephen. I hadn't realized I'd done quite so much. Okay, so this is one of the reasons we're here. The Blueprint UK Whistleblowing Prize honors a recipient for his or her integrity, bravery, and dedication to the public interest. By revealing serious wrongdoing to the wider public and exposing the truth about life-threatening problems with patient safety at University Hospitals Coventry and Warwickshire NHS Trust, Dr. Raj Mattu is a worthy recipient of this year's inaugural prize. The facts of his case are shocking and sadly echo the experiences of many whistleblowers who face severe reprisals from the very institutions they try to improve. And it's important to realize that Dr. Mattu's case, he was actually trying to save people's lives. The background is this. Dr. Mattu is a cardiologist who had a highly successful career in clinical work and groundbreaking medical research. In 1997, he moved to Coventry to help establish a new medical school at Warwick University. As well as directing research labs, he was responsible for teaching and helping the transition of clinical services in Coventry from a district hospital to a standard commensurate with a university hospital. His colleagues unanimously selected him to become the clinical director. While he was carrying out his duties, he identified serious dangers to patient safety and shortcomings in clinical care at UHCW NHS Trust. In 2002, Dr. Mattu blew the whistle on the trust. His principal concern was about the management policy of overcrowding wards for the post-operative care of patients. At least 2 patients died due to overcrowded wards. Deaths which Dr. Mattu claims were otherwise preventable. And he didn't keep quiet. When he saw these problems, he spoke out, but speaking up cost him dearly. Following his disclosures, he endured a record-breaking suspension of almost 6 years. During that time, and even after his eventual dismissal in 2010, the NHS Trust attempted to discredit him, bringing more than 200 unfounded accusations against him. The General Medical Council firmly rejected the allegations and closed his case. He sued the NHS Trust for wrongful dismissal and persevered with clearing his name and championing the plight of whistleblowers. In an extraordinary show of bravery, he stood up to the Trust, the NHS, the Department of Health, and the politicians, all with the aim of serving the greater public interest. After a 13-year struggle, in a landmark ruling in 2014, an employment tribunal found in Dr. Mattu's favour. It ruled that he had suffered detriments from the trust management on more than 25 whistleblowing incidents and concluded that he'd been wrongfully dismissed. It stated that Dr. Mattu's conduct did not cause or contribute to his dismissal and ordered the NHS Trust to pay compensation. Finally, in February this year, 15 years after he first blew the whistle, this is unbelievable, Dr. Mattu was awarded substantial damages. It's also been reported that the NHS Trust spent more than £10 million of public money on fighting this case. Like many whistleblowers, Dr. Mattu has sacrificed his career and much of his life for speaking out against wrongdoing and daring to speak the truth to power. As you heard from Sulette, a recent survey conducted in the UK by the University of Greenwich in association with researchers from Melbourne and Griffith Universities in Australia suggests that the British public may not be altogether happy with our whistleblowing situation either. It found that less than half of Britons believe the management of the organisation they work for is not serious about protecting people who report wrongdoing. And 81% of Britons believe that whistleblowers should be supported rather than punished. A common theme that runs through many whistleblowing stories is that speaking out about what's wrong leads to vehement and ongoing attacks from those in positions of power. Whistleblowing has become not just an effective tool in the fight against corruption, but an issue of freedom of expression, and is increasingly being identified by civil society organizations as a kind of human right, the right to dissent from wrongdoing. Dr. Raj Mathu's case clearly illustrates that one person exercising this right can and has made a substantial difference for all of us. The inaugural Blueprint UK Whistleblowing Prize is awarded to Dr. Raj Mathu.
Yeah, you don't get any choice now. You have to go. You're not allowed to make a speech. You've got to sit here, and I'm going to ask you some questions. That's the penance you pay for winning a lovely award like that. Well done. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's fantastic. I mean,
Thank you.
It's actually... Hearing your story actually makes me angry, but it's also very moving to imagine what it must have been like for you for a decade and a half to live with this, dominating your life. There must have been times when you questioned whether it was worth it. How often?
Yes, you do. I think the worst time was the moment I was suspended. It was the manner in which it was done. I was working without warning, without following due process. The medical director and director of human resources came in, instantly marched me off the premises. There's this hollowness that consumes you for a bit. And I remember for the first 2 months finding I had no purpose to wake up in the morning anymore. After, since the age of 18, there's always been a reason to get going into the day. And especially since I'd become a doctor, there was always the patients going on in your mind who you were going to do certain things for during that day. So the first 2 months for me personally were probably the hardest, to almost adapt and reacclimatize to the new world I'd been placed in. And I found myself watching Richard and Judy. And it's mind-numbing. And I remember sitting there, still in my pajamas, having coffee, thinking, this is what I've been reduced to. And merely because I wasn't prepared to turn a blind eye and watch patients being put at risk and patients dying.
And you turned your frustrations and that sense of loss into a fight, and you would not give up.
Yes.
And I'm sure everybody in this room is delighted you did not give up. But this blueprint is about the UK's public interest disclosure laws, whether they're adequate. Now that you reflect back on what you've been through, did you have any support, any protections at all once you decided to blow the whistle?
No, on the contrary, I agree with, and I'm delighted that Blueprint have produced this report. I've had a look at it, and it is really on the mark. The current Public Interest Disclosure Act, as it stands, does not provide adequate whistleblowing protection for virtually all whistleblowers. And it certainly provided me no whistleblowing protection at all, and I'll explain why. Managers are now quite adept, at the moment you whistleblow, to very quickly, deliberately set about finding falsified allegations. They smother the whistleblowing issue, and they target interest onto you.
And smear you. With false allegations, and often they suspend you, so you are isolated. You cannot speak to anybody. Meanwhile, the whistleblowing incident is slowly drifting into the distance, and they convert a whistleblowing issue into an employment dispute. Yeah. Now, you know, because you stuck at it, you resolutely refused to bend, and you fought this case. In the end, in 2014, you got the legal victory, and then this year you got the compensation. But I just wonder how that works. I mean, even now that you've got the compensation, is that any sort of financial recompense, or are you still out of pocket? I mean, how has the whole thing worked for you?
If somebody in the average public looks at the award for 1.22 million, it is eye-watering. You'd think, well, he's all right for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the 15-year struggle was funded by myself because, again, the organisations that are supposed to protect us, they didn't provide the protection. So over 15 years there were lots of hearings where I had legal representation. I was in the High Courts, the Court of Appeal.
And you were paying
and I was
for all of this?
Having to fund all of this. And then the tribunal, which came at the end, was also funded by ourselves. But by the end of the whole process and paying the costs for the other side, because we'd lost along the way, we have a bill of over 1.4 million. And so we are left with a deficit of a few $100,000.
Wow. So not only the agony of 15 years, but you're still significantly out of pocket.
Yes.
Wow. Just finally, we don't have any more time really, but just tell me what you are doing now, because you know you are a very talented doctor, and I just wonder whether you have any future in the NHS, which has treated you so badly for so long. And second of all, just tell me very briefly what has happened to those managers, those theoretically accountable officials who were responsible for the treatment that you've described today. What's happened to them?
Shall I take the second part first? All the managers involved with my case, not a single one has been held to account. Not a single manager has suffered any detriment or had to answer. During the remedies tribunal hearing, by which stage we'd already got the liability judgment, my silk 3 times asked the Director of Human Resources, having set out the findings against them, which included unlawful treatment, unlawful dismissal, discrimination and whistleblowing detriments, was asked would he like to now apologise to me, and his response was, what for? And she said, she repeated the charges, says, I'll give you another opportunity, and 3 times he said, what for? At which point he said, I think we shall move on. And that, I'm afraid, is the problem with most whistleblowing cases, because they do not hold the people who've carried out those acts to account. Lessons to learn are lost.
Yeah.
Nobody moves forward, and future whistleblowers continue to suffer.
And just very briefly, can you doctor again? Can you go back into the medical profession?
As things stand, no, because I have not worked since 2010, and so I am now de-skilled. So to get back into the National Health Service, I need a National Health Service support to get re-skilled in order to be able to go back and get my working practice up to the right standard.
And no sign of that happening?
No urgent sign, but Jeremy Hunt looks like he may be trying to apply some pressure in the background, so there is a subtle glimmer of hope at the end.
Well, we wish you all the very best, and thank you so much for the contribution you've made over 15 years to this fight for proper sort of defence for whistleblowers, but most particularly, thanks for fighting the good fight for the people of the West Midlands who need to know what is happening in their health service.
Yes.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Matthew.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. It's an extraordinary story, and thanks so much for Dr. Matthew for sharing it with us, and congratulations on the prize. Okay, we're going to move on to more prizes now, and therefore I need to introduce you to another judge. This is the 3rd judge on our panel, and Mark Davis, whom I'm about to introduce you to, he's going to present the 2 final awards this evening. Now, Mark, again, has a fantastic journalistic CV in investigative journalism spanning a couple of decades in Australia. He's won all of Australia's big journalistic prizes, their equivalent of Pulitzer Prizes. He's been involved in documentary making, shows including Foreign Correspondent, Four Corners, Dateline. These are all huge shows in Australia. Mark is extraordinarily well known and respected in his home country, but also to journalists around the world as well for fantastic reporting, much of it focused on human rights and human rights abuses. He worked a lot in East Timor. He's worked on the Guantanamo Bay issue, because one Australian, at least high-profile Australian, was a detainee there. He's done a lot of work on the Julian Assange case. Frankly, he's very committed to human rights, partly because he's not only a journalist, but he's also a lawyer. So he's an ideal kind of bloke to present two of these prizes. So please give a very warm welcome to Mark Davis.
Extremely generous introduction. I've got to get a recording of that. I'm going to use that one. Thank you. Whistleblowers are a very diverse lot. They've got diverse stories and often diverse motivations, but the one thing that unites them all, or generally, is how they end up, and that is normally squashed, normally unemployed, and often disparaged, either to their face or behind their back. And that's been the plight of everyone I've known that's ever come to me with a good story. And my recommendation to people now, more often than not, is don't do it rather than do it. Because I know the consequence, the personal pain. It's not, which you would know, Doctor, it's not just the money, it's the personal pain, and to see who your true friends are and who your true colleagues are, and to have your name disparaged. So one of the ambitions of the Blueprint Awards is to create some new adjectives for these brave people. So the criteria that we applied as judges and as an organisation was threefold: that there needed to be a public good behind the whistleblowing. There needed to be personal bravery on behalf of the individual, and there almost inevitably is. And there needed to be a high personal cost, and again, that's a classic attribute of a whistleblower. And for this award, which is the international award, Blueprint Award, goes to a person who gets the hat trick in each of those criteria. Or if there's any Australians in the room, he wins the trifecta of those criteria. And it's John Kiriakou. John Kiriakou was a CIA officer who advised his nation, and more importantly advised the world, about the torture techniques that were being engaged in by American intelligence agencies, including the very severe use of torture, and John most famously revealed the rather sickeningly common practice of waterboarding. Now, in a just world, the people that authorised that torture, you might think, would be arrested and punished. But in the real world, the person that revealed that illegality was himself arrested and indeed imprisoned. And John Kiriakou spent 30 months in prison for essentially trying to redeem the good name and the good honour of his country and the agencies he worked for. But it didn't do him much good. He was released last year after 30 months in prison. He continues to speak out against the injustice of torture around the world, and it's a great pleasure to announce him as this year's winner. Unfortunately, he can't be here because the British immigration, of course, treat him as a convicted felon, unwelcome on these shores. And we did make some effort to get him here, but he joins us now online. Welcome, John Kiriakou.
Thank you very much.
John, It's Stephen Sacker here, John, and we last spoke when I was interviewing you on the Hard Talk show.
Yes, indeed, we did.
Yeah, so it's not going to be quite so tough tonight because we're here to congratulate you. I'm not here to grill you, just congratulate you. So, number one, what does this mean to you, John? Because you've been through one hell of a journey. What does it mean winning an award like this?
Oh, this really means the world, and I'll explain why, because it may not be the reason that you think. When you're convicted of a crime, whether or not you feel that you deserve it, you really feel more alone than anything else, more abandoned than anything else. My abandonment appeared on the front page of every newspaper in America. And so you go to prison with this feeling that you've really ruined your life. Your friends have walked away from you. You'll never work again, at least not in any kind of capacity to which you've grown accustomed in the past. And in my case, I lost my pension, I lost my house, I lost my friends, I lost everything. But then something like this happens. And you meet a person like Sculette Dreyfus, and you realize that you've not lost everything, that you do have friends, that you're not alone, that people understand what you did and why you did it. The British government considering me a criminal too dangerous to walk the streets of London, notwithstanding. I'm proud of what I did. I'm glad that I did it, and I would do it again, because I know that I do have friends out there who understand the truth.
Well, that is a terrific clarion call. I want to just unpick it a little bit in terms of what you did and the sort of the mental sort of thinking you went through in the course of deciding to blow the whistle. Because let us not forget, you were a covert operations guy. You'd signed up to all of the secrecy deal that goes with being a CIA operative. You cared enormously about the national security of your nation. So how difficult a decision was it to, in essence, chuck away a lot of the promises you'd made about secrecy and go public with something so important about what had been happening inside the CIA?
Well, it was a big enough decision that I actually remained silent for 4 years. And then after 4 years, President Bush said two things in the same week that made me go public. He said in an interview, in a press conference, in a White House press conference, he said that the CIA does not torture. And he looked right in the camera and he said, "We do not torture." But I knew that that was a lie. And then a couple of days later, in response to a reporter's question, he said, "If there is torture, it's the result of a rogue CIA officer." And I knew that that was a lie. And I decided then, in response to a reporter's question of my own, I decided to grant an interview and to tell the truth. And I did that on ABC News here in the United States. It utterly changed the course of the rest of my life.
It was dynamite. I know, because obviously I've researched your story very closely. That was a dynamite interview. I just wonder whether any part of you would accept that the rules have to be different for somebody working in secret national security organizations such as the CIA. I mean, we've just heard the most inspiring story here, John, from another prize winner who has spent 15 years battling because he told the truth about things inside the British Health Service, which were letting people down, were causing unnecessary suffering for people, and he told the truth and suffered as a consequence. But working in the health service is somewhat different from working in, intelligence like CIA. Do you accept that the rules have to be different?
I do accept that the rules have to be different, but I think Americans, especially Americans, also have to understand that on our first day of employment in the CIA, we raise our right hands and we swear to uphold and to protect the Constitution of the United States from enemies, both foreign and domestic. It is not a crime to blow the whistle on a crime. At least it shouldn't be. Now, in the United States, our government has chosen to use the Espionage Act to prosecute whistleblowers. But while I do understand that there has to be a higher standard, certainly for people working in the national security, that higher standard ought to apply to everybody. We're a nation of laws. We are signatories to the United Nations Convention Against Torture. We have a federal anti-torture law. Indeed, we were the authors of the United Nations Convention Against Torture. And so when I saw something, I said something, as our government is constantly telling us to do. And again, I'm glad I did, despite the fact that the price has been high.
And a final quick thought, John. Are you confident that systems are in place today, maybe lessons learned from what happened to you and the experience that you've been through and that your nation now knows about? Are you confident that things are better now, that there's more transparency, there's more accountability, even in organizations like the CIA?
Well, I would say that the CIA has gotten to that point kicking and screaming. One thing that I'm very proud of is in the aftermath of my revelations, it took a little while, but it happened. Congress passed an amendment to the Defense Authorization Act called the McCain-Feinstein Amendment. It, in very crystal clear terms, bans torture. And so, really for the first time since the September 11th attacks, torture is illegal in any of its forms. And I'm proud to say that I at least had something to do with that new law.
I'm loving the fact that I can see the award right behind you. You talked about losing your home and losing friends and so much of your identity. How are you doing today?
My wife gave me some very good advice in the days after my arrest. And she said that despite advice from my attorneys to keep my big mouth shut, that I needed to continue to get my side of the story out. That my case was not about leaking, my case was about whistleblowing. And she said that eventually the Justice Department would move on to somebody else. But your side of the story would be the side of record. And that is what I have decided to do. I will spend the rest of my life talking about torture and talking about whistleblowing. I'm glad I did. Things are actually looking up because people now do see me as a whistleblower rather than as a torture leaker. I was on CNN recently, the international network, and for the very first time, under my screen shot, they identified me as CIA torture whistleblower John Kiriakou, when in the past they had called me CIA leaker John Kiriakou. Right. So the word has gotten out. People understand the difference between leaking and whistleblowing, and I think they've come to appreciate it.
Terrific. John, we're going to have to close there because we've got one more award to give out, but I hope Skype is going to allow you to hear a very, very loud round of applause. Well done and congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.
You know what, John? I'm going to have to tell him to stop. We've got to move on. But anyway, thanks a million. Mark, I'm going to call you up again for the last award.
Very happy to see that one awarded to that man. And I'm very happy to see the next recipient. The next award is called the Enduring Impact Award. It's for a whistleblower whose actions and disclosures continue to reverberate through the years rather than just from within the last 12 months, within this last news cycle or the last award cycle, if you like. In a way, we were almost going to call this a Hall of Fame. We weren't too sure how well it would translate through each culture, but that's essentially what it is. This is a Hall of Fame award for someone who's made an extraordinary and lasting contribution. Chelsea Manning is a United States soldier currently serving a 35-year sentence for her role in exposing abuses and suspected war crimes in Iran and Afghanistan. Manning was first moved to make her disclosures when she saw what is now known, or what we now call, the collateral murder video. It was a video from an American gunship, an attack that killed a dozen unarmed civilians. And rather poignantly, given the building we're in, and it only occurred to me today, that included 2 Reuters employees and 2 children who were severely injured. Inspired by that event, amongst others, but I believe that was her principal motivation, Manning then released a huge trove, of course, of further material dealing with the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan. Her actions meet the three key elements for a Blueprint Award, and that is the scale of her disclosure continues to reverberate. Her bravery was extraordinary and her punishment was extreme. A whistleblower's lot, as we were saying earlier, and John also referred to, is often lonely, and no more so than for Chelsea Manning. As the news story fades away, her punishment continues, and we hope she hears our words of support and gratitude. Her friend, Aaron Kirkhouse, accepts the award on her behalf.
I've known and been friends with Chelsea since I knew her as Bradley in Wales about 10 or 15 years ago. And she's asked me to attend in her place this evening to express her thanks and to read a short statement. Good evening from sunny Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. I wish I could be there to accept this award in person, but since I cannot, I'm delighted to have Aaron accept it on my behalf. As you know, I'm held in an American military prison with only a small library and without access to the internet. In this time of rapid technological advances in social networking and the machine learning age, it's quite an odd predicament to find myself in. Today, when once obscure online refrains are now finding their way into the global lexicon, PICS or it didn't happen, it's easy to feel disconnected from a world exponentially intertwined and dependent on technology. As a military prisoner, my public persona is carefully controlled and enforced. Any interviews or statements that I make, such as this one, must be written or dictated through somebody else who types it up on my behalf. I'm not allowed to be recorded over the telephone, do any video interviews, or have any pictures taken, with the exception of the occasional grainy mugshot. For those living in my situation, it's easy to start feeling invisible, left behind and dismissed by the rest of a fast-paced society. Despite these obstacles, I know I need to keep going. It's important to stay vocal, to stay creative, active, motivated, and to keep fighting. I keep fighting to survive and thrive. I'm fighting my court-martial conviction and sentence before a military appeals court starting this month. I'm fighting to make the full investigation by the FBI public. I'm fighting to grow my hair beyond the 2-inch male standard set by the US military. I keep fighting to warn the world of the dangerous trend in which the only information you can access is the kind that someone with money or power wants you to see. And I keep fighting to let people know that they too can create change. By staying informed and educated, anyone can make a difference. You have the ability to fight for a better world for everyone, even the most desperate, those at the bottom of the social ladder, refugees from conflict, queer and trans individuals, prisoners, and those born into poverty. Thank you all so very much for your support over the years, and thank you to Lady Hollick, Mr. Davis, and Dr. Dreyfus for selecting me to be the first person to receive this award. It is truly an amazing treat. I'm honoured that my voice continues to be heard. Thank you for all of those listening and choosing to fight alongside me, and of course thank you to Aaron for accepting this award for me. I'm grateful to you all for being here tonight and being there for me tomorrow. Think what we might accomplish if we do one thing, perhaps a grand undertaking, or even what may seem to be a tiny, insignificant gesture, each day with a simple goal of making the world a better place. Good night, everybody. And there's, I should say, I've been told to say that there's a smiley emoticon as well at the end. Thank you.
Actually, it's extraordinary to think that Chelsea sort of had to dictate that to a prison guard. You know, it's.
Well, no, not a prison guard. So she can speak on the telephone.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah,
so she could do it over the phone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an extraordinary statement and really actually inspirational. So thanks for giving it to us.
No, thank you. And she's absolutely delighted.
Well, you know, I wish we could do what we did with John Kiriakou.
I know, and they won't let her.
No, we can't. Yeah. We can't do that. But listen, Aaron, thanks a million. That's
thank
fantastic.
you so much.
No,
thanks.
it's much appreciated. Well, thank you all so much for being here. That's pretty much it from the sort of formalities, but of course there's things to drink and things to eat outside, and I do encourage you to enjoy those. Just for me, I'm so happy that I was able to be here tonight, because the stories we've heard have been so fantastic, and it really is about courage, not being cowed. I mean, like Chelsea Manning just refusing to be cowed. Mark said something really interesting when he said, you know, when in Australia, when he's acting still as a journalist and people approach him sometimes with whistleblowing information, and sometimes he feels moved to say to them, you know what, in your own interest, maybe don't do it, or at least think very hard before doing it, because there is going to be so much pain, so much loneliness and agony on the way, on the path, if you choose to go in that direction. But, you know, to me, just thank God that there are people in this world who still do, despite all of that advice, despite the warnings and the knowledge that it's going to come with so much difficulty, they still say, this is what I want to do. I want to tell the truth. I want to hold the organization that I work for, or the government that I serve, to account. And I want the people whom they are supposed to serve to know what is being done in their name. It's so important, and it still happens, and there are still brave, brave people out there, and these awards are all about that. So thanks to Blueprint, to Thomson Reuters, to everybody who made this possible tonight, and thank you all for being here. Thanks a lot.